Okay, hello everyone. Well, thank you for coming bright and early for us and late for Dr. Bailey. Um, Pleasure to be here. So my name is Zan Botso. I'm assistant professor of philosophy here at UW Stout and director of the Center for Applied Ethics, and we're excited to have Dr. Bailey and all of you here. Let me just say a little bit of something about the center. We put on all sorts of programs. The Center for Applied Ethics is an endowed center, which was founded in the early 2000s based on an anonymous donation to infuse ethics into the curriculum and into with respect to professional development in the community. We put on all sorts of programs. We have speakers like Dr. Bailey. You can visit our website for upcoming talks. We do the Philosopher's Cafe, which is every second Wednesday of most months, where we meet at a local pub and have conversations about fun, interesting topics. So please have a look at our programming. This event is also co-sponsored by the Bernard Center for the Study of Institutions and Innovations, so we're thankful for them as well. Um, but today I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Andrew Bailey. Dr. Andrew Bailey is Associate Professor of Philosophy at Yale-NUS College. So he's coming to us from Singapore. So NUS stands for the National University of Singapore. So it's very early for us, but very late for Dr. Bailey. So we're very appreciative of that. His most recent research focuses on money, and he has a new book coming out entitled Resistance Money, A Philosophical Case for Bitcoin, which he has co-authored with Bradley Rettler and Craig Warmke, and which is being published by Routledge. You can pre-order the book now on Amazon, and if you want the link, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to. I think it's on our website as it happens, so you can visit the Center for Applied Ethics website, and the link is there. Today, Dr. Bailey will be speaking to us about privacy in a ledger, technology, and ethics. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Bailey. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Zan, and thank you everybody for being here. Give me just a second to start screen sharing. I'm not a Microsoft Teams wizard, but I believe that should do the trick. Are we good?
I don't see the screen actually.
I don't see it. Oh, it's coming. Wait, no.
What?
Let's try that again, yeah.
As I said, I'm not a Teams wizard.
There we go.
Yep.
Oh, and it just went away.
So it went away when I went full screen. Sorry about this, folks. Zan and I tested this. It was all good right before here. Okay, so share, side by side, window, Keynote. So far, so good.
Yep.
And then I will go full screen. And is it still good or not?
No, see, that's when it goes away.
Okay, I will not go full screen then. Do it once more. Sorry, folks. We'll do it like this. Is that all right?
Perfect.
Thank you all for being here. And thank you, Zan, again, for the kind invitation. Money is all around us. Sometimes it can be hard to see, though, like water for a fish. Now, that might be a weird way to start, especially if you think about what I just said. You're like, no, I can see money, and I think about it all the time. Money is very present to our lives in some ways. But the way in which money is present is often just this very simple question: how can I get more of it? I was worrying about money just this morning, in fact, while I was writing these slides. Maybe you were too. And we think too about the ethics of spending money, but there are a number of questions that are less well understood and studied by people who think about applied ethics, which concern money production and money management. These are some of the questions that I want to think about today. These questions have been brought to the fore in recent times by the emergence of cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies are a new kind of money that have very strange design choices built into them. So they raise new possibilities for what money could be. And it's not very often that new possibilities for money roll around. Human beings discovered gold many thousands of years ago and converged on using that as a money. That was a long time ago. And then more recently, people discovered paper money of the kind that we now use quite commonly, fiat money, which has no intrinsic value, no use, and can be printed for free and is super convenient to use, unlike gold. You don't have to haul it around. Now, cryptocurrencies, as I see them, are another phase shift in money. So they prompt us to think about questions like these. And these are normative questions, not purely technical ones. Who should produce money? What rules should govern the production of money? Who should be able to control transactions? Who deserves access to monetary systems and who doesn't? Who's to be excluded? And should money be private? If so, how? So as I see it, these are blended questions that require an interdisciplinary approach. They're not purely technical because they have that normative word in there, should. So we need to take an interdisciplinary approach that integrates philosophy and applied ethics with other fields. Now, some of what I'll say will be somewhat speculative because this is a new kind of money that we're thinking about. And I'm going to try to blend some empirical, some technical, and some normative methods in what follows. Now, maybe you have some burning preliminary questions before we say anything else. I mentioned cryptocurrencies, but this is going to be a talk mostly about Bitcoin. So why Bitcoin? Why now? And why me? Let me just get these out of the way for you. Why Bitcoin? Well, there are a bunch of cryptocurrencies, 13,000, perhaps 20,000, depending on who you ask. But Bitcoin is king. It's the oldest. It's by far the most used, the most well understood, and has the biggest market cap. There are other reasons, too, to focus on Bitcoin, but we think of it, my research co-authors and I, we think of it as the paradigm cryptocurrency and indeed the most important. My co-author Craig Warmke and I did write a paper called Bitcoin is King. If you want a kind of spicy, but still pretty sober take on why Bitcoin is king here. Why now? Well, cryptocurrencies have occasionally been the rage and then occasionally receded from view and then occasionally been the rage again. And the thing that I noticed when I observed that pattern, so you can see the chart is just market cap of all cryptocurrencies. It comes and goes, but each time it comes back, and each time it's a little bit more important just in terms of its economic footprint than ever before. So I think this deserves careful attention using all the intellectual resources we have. Finally, why me? Well, 7 years ago, almost to the day, I was offered tenure, and then the next day, my college president told me, Andrew, we need you to lead up our philosophy, politics, and economics major, and we need to make this a real PPE major, which means integration. So I started looking for topics that could bring philosophy, politics, and economics together, and topics that students wanted to talk about. Turns out that Bitcoin is one of those. It's just like candy for students. And I should say it's not why me, it's why us. So these are my co-authors, Brad Rettler and Craig Warmke, with whom I work on all these topics. You should follow them on Twitter and read everything they've written. They're lovely dudes and great philosophers as well. So here's what's going to happen in the talk to come. We'll say something about what privacy is, why it matters. We'll think through some basics about what Bitcoin is and how it works. Then we'll think about this curious political and technical movement out of which Bitcoin was born, this cypherpunk movement. And then I'll submit to you 3 problems for Bitcoin privacy, for why it sort of fits uncomfortably when thinking about financial privacy. And then we'll think about ways to resolve that using specialized privacy tools within Bitcoin and draw some speculative, some futurological, and some, we hope, normative conclusions from all of that. So what is privacy and why does it matter? We should first distinguish privacy from anonymity or secrecy. Privacy is not hiding. As I see things, privacy is rather the ability to voluntarily hide. It's the ability to choose when to hide or not, to selectively reveal oneself to the world. So you exercise your privacy when you get to voluntarily hide or disclose yourself, and it's violated when that ability is taken away from you without your consent, as when someone discloses your personal information or others without your consent. So privacy is intimately wrapped up with consent here. And philosophers, when they think about consent, often distinguish between affirmative or extracted consent. Affirmative is given not in response to a prompt or in response to a demand, but rather it's offered freely. And extracted consent is more like when someone's trying to get you to just say yes so that they can do what they want. Consent is more morally meaningful and transformative in the former case. So that's really what I'll be thinking about when I think about consent, is affirmative consent. And of course, once you think about that distinction, you can probably see some applications that are relevant for software design. Think about when you're clicking through an app on your phone. Is it demanding that you say, yes, 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 I consent to giving away this information? Or do you have to go into the settings and then affirmatively offer up your information? 2 very different approaches. Perhaps you'll notice them next time you install some new software. I think privacy is good. Maybe you agree. But why? It's distinct from the value of just hiding, since it's distinct from hiding. So maybe we can divide up the value that privacy has in at least two categories. There's final value, value that privacy has for its own sake. And maybe one way to see this is just to think of privacy as a kind of freedom. So people who value freedom for its own sake, we call those people liberals, they'll tend to value privacy also because privacy is just a freedom to disclose or not to disclose yourself to the world. Privacy also, I think, has instrumental value. It's a tool to achieve other valuable things. So here's a nifty argument from James Rachel's in a paper that's understudied from the 70s. I just found this randomly one time, and I just love this paper. He shows that privacy allows us to have distinct kinds of relationships with other human beings, and that distinction and variety is valuable. So think of it this way. Will you tell different things to your students than you tell to your lovers or to your doctors or to your lawyers? One hopes the answer is yes. And you'll hide things from some and selectively choose to reveal some to others. And that, in fact, helps define and delineate differentiation in these relationships and variety. And that's good. It's good for human flourishing. So that's one kind of instrumental value for privacy. Another is that it's a vital check on our institutions. When corporations or states grow too large, too powerful, when they overstep their bounds, when we have the ability to control what they know about us, to decide for ourselves whether to disclose or not, that's an important way to keep those institutions in check. So privacy is good. Let's look at a particular kind of privacy. This is financial privacy. What you buy shows and doesn't just tell who you are. And I'm thinking here of the theory of revealed preferences as economics, as in economics. You can say that you like something, you can say that you value it, but you show that you value it when you give up something precious for it. And that's what you do when you buy something with money. You give up something of value for it. So when we buy stuff, we are using money to reveal who we are. So think of some examples here. Buying hormones, buying political books, buying sex toys, buying religious icons, buying diapers. These disclose intimate details about your life, about your world, about your relationship to it, and even about your inner life, your opinions, your ambitions, your hopes, your dreams. And again, it's showing, not telling, because something of value is at stake. It's not just words, words, words. It's action. So money is a site of revelation. And so privacy, when it comes to money, is even more important than it might otherwise be. So here's an interesting question I've puzzled over. Maybe you'll have thoughts about this. Privacy is often a topic in public debate, but why is financial privacy so rarely part of that discussion? It's interesting. My first guess, maybe you can help me with this, is that there's something kind of dirty about money. People don't like talking about it. And so monetary versions of some of these ethical questions and some questions about privacy get pushed to the edges. It's easier to just talk about human rights than to talk about a human right to privacy and to financial privacy in particular, for example. So that's financial privacy, a bit about why it matters. Now, the legacy financial system that we know, for example, the dollar in the United States, has this nifty tool to help many of us achieve some degree of financial privacy. It's called cash. Many of us use this every day. The key thing to notice about cash is that it's a bearer asset. You can hold cash yourself. Nobody has to hold it for you. And then you can give it directly to someone else or receive it directly from them without an intermediary. And because there aren't intermediaries, either to hold your asset for you, like an asset manager, or to stand between the two, as in a transaction, that allows for privacy because then there's not a third party viewing the transaction or viewing the contents of your wallet. That's for your eyes only. And cash is an important and stable social compromise between two things. On the one hand, there's financial privacy, yes. On the other hand, there's a felt need for oversight and control on the part of regulators and the part of lawmakers. Cash, as we'll see, has serious limits to the kinds of financial privacy it can provide. But right now, it's something of a stable compromise between both felt needs. We can measure privacy with this simple little tool. It's called an anonymity set. There are other ways to measure privacy. This is one important one. And think of this as just the size of the crowd within which you're receding. So how many people spent $5 banknotes at 7-Eleven yesterday? You spent a $5 banknote at 7-Eleven yesterday. The number of people who also did that is your anonymity set. And then you sort of fall within that crowd and can't be picked out from the crowd. Now, cache anonymity sets often vary in size, but they're often significant to give us real privacy protections. Our world, though, is becoming cashless. Digital money is everywhere. It's not new. In fact, digital money is older than I am. I turn 40 next week. Digital money dates back to the 70s at least. And the thing about digital money as we know it now is that it's packed with trusted third parties. They're mediators and they're managers. So you can't directly give someone else digital money. Instead, you have to use a bank or a payment processor or some other neobank institution to do it for you. So also, you can't hold digital money yourself. Instead, you hold it in an account managed by some third party. So for example, if I'm sending Zan a PayPal balance to bribe him for inviting me to give this talk, who would know about that and what managers or mediators are involved? Well, a couple at least. So there's me and PayPal. So I give them some, or me to my bank. My bank gives some money to PayPal. PayPal gives money to Zan's bank. Zan's bank gives money to him, stored in an account that they hold and manage for him. So there's all sorts of trusted intermediaries and managers in digital money as we know it. And they are a threat to privacy in this sense. They can know things about those transactions. They can disclose it with or without your permission. And they might do it even unknowingly or against their own consent, as when being hacked. So they're honeypots with lots of private information there. And of course, people want to break into those honeypots and take the information for their own purposes. Enter Bitcoin. It started with this weird little nine-page white paper in 2008 describing a very curious kind of monetary system. Digital money, yes, but with some real quirks. We'll see just a few of them and what they actually do. Here's a high-level overview. First, there's an asset. This is a synthetic digital commodity. It's synthetic because we made it up. It's not like gold. It's digital. It lives on computers and it's a commodity. It's something that can be moved around, that can be divided, and that is more or less fungible. Bitcoin lives, unlike, say, cash, not in banknotes or coins, but in what we call UTXOs, unspent transaction outputs. And you can think of these as just little containers that have within them some quantity of Bitcoin. And each UTXO is associated with a password or a private key. And you can't unlock it and spend it unless you have that private key. Of course, Bitcoin has a price. And that's what you hear about in the news. But there's so much more to Bitcoin than just the asset that has a price that goes up and down. Then there's Bitcoin, the network. And this is the network of digital computers in which Bitcoin, the asset, lives. And it's sustained by a bunch of nodes, miners, and users. We'll say what that means in just a second. Now, other digital monies and assets, they live in digital networks as well. But Bitcoin's is special in this respect. Anyone can join it, and anyone can do one of those three things. So nodes is just a fancy word for a computer running the Bitcoin software. They connect to other computers, and then they send messages to each other. Messages are transactions saying, send this Bitcoin from here to here. And when you submit a transaction to the network, the nodes check it for a digital signature that proves that you have the password to that UTXO, that little piece of Bitcoin you're spending. So then the transaction is on this node and it spreads to all the nodes that it connects to, all the way so the whole network sees that transaction. Miners collect transactions into blocks and they compete in a mathematical competition to find some magic number, and the winner gets to publish a block of transactions. That's important to publish transactions in blocks so that there's a way to keep the ledger, which is the record of where the Bitcoin is, consistent across the entire network instead of piecemeal and varying across the various nodes, and to prevent double spending. So you don't want it so somebody can spend a little bit of Bitcoin and then send the same transaction somewhere else. That would be bad. We don't want that. Miners help prevent that. So miners provide a kind of network security. They give transactions a canonical order. And the price that we pay for this isn't military might or political power, as with dollars. So that's how we get security there, is the force of the state. It's just electricity that miners are burning to do these guesswork to find that magic number. Users sign and send transactions to the network. The miners collect them and publish them, and then they're verified by nodes, and so on. Bitcoin also has layers like financial systems, other financial systems. So there's a base settlement layer. That's the one I've just been describing. And then there are payment layers built atop that, just as Visa is a fast payments layer that's built atop bank settlement layers. We'll see how this works in a second for Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has a payments layer called Lightning. Payments pass from node to node via channels. So you connect from one node to another and then on. And so let's say that your node A, you want to send some Bitcoin to B. You could just do that directly. But let's say you want to send it to node E. You don't have to have a channel to node E. Instead, you just send some to B, who sends the same quantity to C, to D, and then to E. Now, this allows for some pretty cool things. The channels are created with transactions created on Bitcoin's blockchain. That's just the collection of blocks submitted and published by miners. But the Lightning payments don't exist in the Bitcoin blockchain. So the miners don't see them, and nobody else can see them either, except those participating in that little chain, A, B, C, D, E. It's fast and cheap. This is relevant to privacy, as we'll see in a second. So here's the result of the way Bitcoin is constructed. We have money without trusted third parties. In particular, there's no trusted makers. There's nobody who makes Bitcoin that's a trusted or deputized party. Anybody can mine Bitcoin. There's no trusted mediators because users send their transactions to each other without intermediaries. And there's no trusted managers. That is, you can hold Bitcoin yourself. Now you might wonder, how are there no trusted mediators given that little diagram of the Lightning network? After all, it looks like B is an intermediary from A to E. So the thing to note there is that B doesn't actually have access to the Bitcoin that A is sending through them. It's locked and available only for E to unlock. So B is not a trusted intermediary in the sense that they are holding the money along the way. It's very nifty, very curious, and very much unlike the way legacy financial networks work, where banks take custody of the payments that they're mediating. Now, as we'll see, this all has implications for privacy. I want to talk about the cypherpunks for a bit, and you'll see why. I've said what Bitcoin is, but why is Bitcoin? Why would you want to deploy this curious, complex, and sort of bizarre system? Who benefits and how? A quick look at the early 90s will give us some answers. So here's a fear that the so-called cypherpunks had beginning in, let's say, 1992, 1993. And it's named after cyberpunk fiction like Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. They looked into the future and they had this fear. They saw that network computers were going to be very powerful and important for society. They were right about that. And they feared this, that they would be tools not for human liberation, for joy, for productivity, for connection, but rather for surveillance and control. They were right about that too. So they saw this at least as a possibility, and something of this is unfolding as they feared in some ways, a creeping digital authoritarianism. And this applies especially to money because money is so important. It reveals who we are, and we use money a lot. And money matters to us, and it is a big part of human life. So authoritarianism over the money is particularly worrisome. So here's what the cypherpunks decided to do. We're going to use a bunch of these new cryptography tools developed in the 70s and 80s. We're going to build software to empower individuals using those new mathematical techniques. So here are 3 examples. You may have heard of one of these only. You may have used them indirectly. So there's PGP, pretty good privacy, which allows people to send messages without anybody else being able to read them. There's Tor, which allows you to browse the web anonymously. And there's end-to-end encrypted messaging. This is the one that you're likely to have used. So if you've used WhatsApp, you've used cypherpunk technology because encryption is there deployed to prevent even the people running the servers that you connect to from reading the messages you send when they're encrypted in that way. Now, the holy grail for the cypherpunks wasn't to create digital money. Again, that has existed longer than I have. It was to create digital cash. That is money that's a bearer asset that you can give to others without somebody else standing in the middle and that you can hold yourself without an account manager. So the cypherpunks hailed from across the left and right in the political spectrum. What really united them ideologically was anti-authoritarianism, and they saw authorities as being both corporate and state, not otherwise, and they really wanted to equip individuals to resist all kinds of authorities. And the thing that unites them in terms of method is that they rejected electoral politics or corporate politics as a solution, and violence and retreat. So they're not Ted Kaczynski types, they're not senator types, they're not monk types. Instead, they favored direct action to start building tools for freedom, not asking others to help, not relying on the state, not relying on the market even, but relying on software to achieve human freedom. Just to see how the cypherpunk vibe works, just imagine a moment of crisis. How do you respond? We'll have a little grid, a 2x2, to see some possible responses. So we have two distinctions. There's critique and construction. To critique is just to complain and to point out what's wrong with something. To construct is to build an alternative. And then there's separatist and Puritan approaches. Separatists like to leave an institution they see as broken or flawed. Puritans stay and they fix it, named after the Puritans of the Church of England of the 1700s. So to see what a separatist might look like, think about American libertarians, Occupy protesters. They mostly complain, and they're not really working within the institutions they're talking about. They mostly just complain. Now, some of my best friends are libertarians, but that's how I see them. And you might see protesters who aren't part of the institutions they're protesting as falling within that broad category. There are Puritans who critique as well. Think of the Electronic Frontier Foundation or the ACLU. They work within legacy systems and they critique them. They're not really producing alternatives and they're not really separating entirely. They're part of the system, but protesting within. There's a constructive and Puritan approach favored by many progressive lawmakers, where you use the might of the state to accomplish your ends, to achieve some human flourishing or some human freedom that you desire, and you do it within Congress. And you build things, laws, for example, or new regulatory agencies to combat new disasters you see on the horizon or to correct past wrongs. So those are the Puritan constructors. Now, finally, we find the cypherpunks, which I think of as being in the separatist construction camp. They're separatists in this sense. They're separating from legacy institutions and not using them. They're not using banks, for example, when building Bitcoin. And they're constructing something. They're not just complaining. They're actually builders. It's a curious little box, and not many have occupied it, but it has some potency. Now, there's an intramural cypherpunk debate between replacement of legacy systems and supplementing. I'm actually going to fast forward those slides, but I would love to talk about it with anybody who wants to talk about it. Here's the thing that cypherpunks do, and here's how they do it here's the institutions they build. They use cryptography to replace the key points of trust with verification. They replace trust, as in trusted third parties, with math. So for example, when you're signing a Bitcoin transaction, you don't ask people to trust you that you have the private key or the password. You prove it by signing a transaction. And the miners don't just claim to have done that mathematical puzzle and to have found a magic number to prove that they did the most work of anybody else. No, they submit what are called proofs of work. They have a mathematical proof that they did what they said they did. So here we verify rather than trust, and we use cryptography to do that verification. And that's really the heart of a cypherpunk style institution. It's replacing trust with cryptography. Very cool idea, very weird. And I just love it. Thinking about this and thinking about its social implications and what it does to our world. This is very applied ethics. So what did Bitcoin do? It used cryptographic tools to create a new institution that's opt-in, and it's global. Millions participate now with minimal trust assumptions. And it's all in service of a digital bearer instrument. So it's not digital money. Instead, it's closer to digital cash, where you can hold it yourself and give it to someone else without an intermediary. And this is without anybody's permission. Now, control is just one cypherpunk fear, but the other one was surveillance. And that takes us back full circle to privacy. Let's go there now. Bitcoin is a tool for privacy, but it also has serious problems. We'll talk about the problems first. So here are three problems or three barriers to attaining financial privacy in Bitcoin. And just the high level statement here is that Bitcoin's blockchain, its ledger, is a complete list of all the Bitcoin that ever was, is, and where it's been. It's public, anybody can read it, and it's permanent. Now, this is different than a bank's ledger, which is private and which might even be deleted as when the bank goes under, which does happen. Bitcoin is public and permanent. So this is going to create some serious privacy challenges. And these actually have analogs with physical cash. So thinking about that analogy will help us to understand them and the difficulties in getting real privacy with Bitcoin. So first is privacy and acquisition. Let me put it as this question. Can you acquire money, a UTXO, that's a quantity of Bitcoin, remember, a banknote, without revealing important personal information? So privacy and acquisition. Can you privately get it? Can you receive money without later revealing where it goes? So can you receive it in a way that the person who gave it to you won't know where it ends up? And then can you spend the money without revealing where it's been, without revealing its history? So privacy and acquisition, in forward privacy, and privacy and spending. Three challenges for privacy. Now, all three of these are difficult to achieve for Bitcoin because the ledger is permanent and public. Anybody can see where the money came from, so they can make guesses about acquisition. They can also see where it goes later, and they can see where it's been upon receiving it. But this is a serious problem, three serious problems, in fact. And they're really tricky. Now, even with cash, 100% privacy is not possible. But real privacy can still be attained, and cash just works. It's a potent privacy tool. Here's how. So remember those three problems: acquisition, privacy, and spending. So how do you get privacy and acquisition for cash? Well, just work for cash or sell things for cash on Craigslist to somebody who you don't give your real name. You'll get new banknotes that have no connection at all to your real name. So you want forward privacy? Well, just save in cash, not bank accounts, but just under your mattress or in a wallet. And no one who gave you those banknotes will know where they went. They know that they went to you, but they will not know where it went after that. And it's privacy and spending. We'll just spend that cash that you saved, and no one you buy from will know where those banknotes are from. They can't look at the coin or the note and then see where it's been, unlike a Bitcoin UTXO. Now, this is all possible because cash doesn't require mediators and managers. So I can give cash to someone directly without a third party viewing or taking part in or permitting that transaction. We just close the door. We do it behind closed doors, and we achieve some significant privacy. And cash also doesn't require managers. You can have cash in your own wallet, not only in a bank account that's a chartered bank looked after by deputized regulators and so on. So cash is really cool. And it's cool because it doesn't have mediators and managers. It's a bearer asset. Now, there are limits on privacy through cash. So there's liquidity limits. I challenge you, try to acquire or to get rid of $1 million in cash. This will be hard. You could get rid of $100,000 in cash. Laundering small amounts of cash, if you're a criminal, is not a problem. The larger it is, the harder it is to either acquire or to get rid of. There's participation limits because not all merchants want to receive cash in payment for their goods, and not everybody wants to give cash. Some people would rather just use PayPal. More power to them. Totally understandable. Visa's great. Now these cards that you tap, it's lovely. So no wonder people are going cashless. Along those lines, cash can also be inconvenient, especially in large amounts. You need a briefcase to carry that $1 million. Several briefcases, in fact. Good luck. So the consequence here is that the anonymity sets for cash, remember that measures the size of the crowd you're hiding within. Those can be sometimes quite small. Nonetheless, though, cash is a stable social and political compromise. It's privacy, yes, but within limits. And I say stable in the sense very few people think we should get rid of cash, despite moving towards a cashless society in some ways. In part just because they think, yeah, it's a pretty good compromise. It's got these nice features, but also it doesn't enable too much crime. For example, it's not that easy to launder that much money using cash. Most money laundering uses banks, in fact. So let's think about how Bitcoin can help, or how Bitcoin can become more private. I'll describe to you how that works, and then we'll compare it to cash and start to draw some normative consequences from that discussion. I want to start with just two myths. The first is that Bitcoin transactions are fully anonymous or secret because the ledger is all math and doesn't have names. That's just not true. You can trace transactions and connect them to people and places by issuing subpoenas. Once you know one person in the transaction chain, you issue a subpoena to that person and then figure out what they were doing with Bitcoin and trace backwards. People can do this. Bitcoin transactions, furthermore, says the myth, are all traceable. So this is the other side. That all traceable all the time because the ledger is public and permanent. That's not quite right either. In fact, the truth is somewhere in between. So here's the truth. Bitcoin's permissionless architecture. That means that you can build and do stuff on Bitcoin without anybody's permission. It's an open network and an open protocol. This enables some unorthodox techniques, routing, joining, swapping of coins that can create some new possibilities for privacy. Now, in general, Bitcoin privacy tools obscure as in a crowd rather than shield as behind a mask. So they don't cryptographically encrypt the transaction. Instead, they smear it out as in a crowd, make it harder to discover that one transaction among the many, to find Waldo, if you like. Now, as long as Bitcoin's privacy tools are technically viable and difficult to stop, some privacy is possible within limits. So let's look at the tools, then we'll look at the limits. The tools are various. Here's some: CoinJoin, Lightning, others. I'm only going to talk about CoinJoin and Lightning. You can look up the others if you like. There's some nifty stuff here. A CoinJoin is a special joint transaction that looks like this. So we have three parties, A, B, and C, and they push their Bitcoin into the transaction, and then the transaction splits it up into, let's say, 6 outputs. So imagine that they're all melting down their gold, and then the gold is recast into 6 coins of equal size. Now, let's say A gets outputs 1 and 4. But someone looking at this transaction on the ledger doesn't know which of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 of those outputs, doesn't know which ones are A's. Only A knows that. Interesting. This is a way to smear the blockchain and to obscure connections between inputs and outputs. Now, the anonymity set for a round of CoinJoin is just equal to the number of participants. And what's cool is that you can repeat these with additional participants, with other participants in different times, at different sizes, and so on. So just imagine a CoinJoin, there's one of those outputs, and then that output is pushed into another CoinJoin transaction. So if somebody's trying to figure out this one on the left, where did this input go? Now they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 possible outputs to think about and to trace. And of course, we could do it again and again and again. So we can achieve better privacy over time as long as additional participants are joining. Here's a privacy tool for Lightning. Let's look at node E on the right-hand side of the graph. E receives a payment. Now here's what E knows. It knows it got the payment from D. What E may not know, if a particular tool is used, routing, onion routing, it may not know whether that payment ultimately came from A, B, C, or D. What E doesn't know is which one of those actually gave it the money. All it knows is that it most proximately came from D. So the anonymity set for Lightning payment is equal to the number of indirectly connected nodes that have enough channel capacity. And what's cool here is that network growth can actually enhance privacy. It grows the size of the crowd within which you're hiding. So imagine that A sent the payment to E, and then we've added these other two nodes, F and G. So E is thinking, okay, who sent me this money? It's not just A, B, C, and D that are the possibilities. Now it's F and G are the possibilities. So the anonymity set went from 4 to 6 when we added these nodes, F and G, to the network. So network growth enhances privacy by growing the size of the crowd. So just to connect it to our 3 privacy problems, here's how it works. Privacy and acquisition is enhanced through peer-to-peer transactions. Just work for Bitcoin or sell things for Bitcoin, and you receive Bitcoin from someone else without the permission or oversight or mediation of anyone else. Forward privacy can be achieved through coin joining. After you receive some money, a UTXO, put it into a coin join round, and it's split up, melted down, and then recast into new coins that have no deterministic link to the old ones. And privacy in spending can be achieved to some degree by using Lightning. So I want to spend to E, but I don't want E to know where it came from. I just route it across a couple of nodes, and E gets a payment, but they don't know who sent it to them or the identity of that person beyond what you want it to tell. You could just have an email address or a fake name or a Signal account. Now, there are severe limits to these Bitcoin privacy tools, and I want to emphasize this. They are severe. First, there's active network surveillance. This is kind of analogous to cameras for cash, except it's way easier to surveil the internet than to connect to all the cameras at all the 7-Elevens in the world. People monitor Bitcoin and they monitor the Lightning Network. And you need to use the right tools to hide. There are liquidity constraints. How much capital is actually locked in these Bitcoin Lightning channels from node to node? And how much Bitcoin is actually pushed into coin joins and smeared across the chain with other Bitcoin? The more the merrier, of course, but there are limits here. Not everybody does this. So how many people are actually taking part? There's a participation limit that keeps the anonymity set small. And of course, these tools, as you might guess, are a total pain to use. So here's a hypothesis, and this will take us into normative territory. The kind and degree of privacy that we achieve here is actually pretty analogous to that enjoyed by physical cash. And the trade-offs are similar too. So the fundamental trade-off is often between, on the one hand, speed and convenience, or privacy. You need to do something more deliberate, use the specialized tool to get privacy, or you do something for speed and convenience that sacrifices privacy. And it's achieved with cryptography in a separate system built by cypherpunk activists. That's sort of weird, sort of cool. Now, note, trusted parties ruin the party. So when Bitcoin users use payment processors and custodians to handle the Bitcoin for them, managers and mediators, they get none of these benefits. No privacy, no censorship resistance. Similarly, Bitcoin derivatives, for example, perhaps you've heard of these recently launched Bitcoin ETFs, exchange-traded funds. These have none of Bitcoin's disintermediating features. That's just a custodian holding Bitcoin for you and then giving you an IOU for that Bitcoin. Maybe a comparison to think about this is physical gold versus an IOU to gold. Physical gold has all sorts of features. It's shiny, it's beautiful, it's malleable, conducts electricity. But a share in an ETF, an IOU for some gold held by a bank somewhere in New York or London, that has none of those features. It's not shiny, and it does not conduct electricity, and so on. So if you want to have a good time with Bitcoin, you got to use it yourself, not use a trusted third party to manage and mediate it for you. Okay, this is conclusions, but there's some substantive reasoning to come here, and we're really going to get into the normative conclusions at play here. So I want to look at this in 3 dimensions. I want to share with you a cache parity thesis, reflect on what history teaches here, and then what the future holds and where to think next. So here's my cache parity thesis. I think digital bearer instruments should be treated more or less the same as physical bearer instruments. They have very similar properties when it comes to what we care about here. They lack managers and mediators. And so we should measure their costs and benefits in similar ways, whether as policymakers or as applied ethicists. Now, many agree that financial privacy has value. I think they're right. It's to be weighed against its costs. And there is indeed a felt public interest in tamping down criminal financial activity, money laundering, ransomware, and so on. So that's the one side of the compromise that I mentioned with cash. It's this felt need to limit some of its privacy features. But of course, financial privacy still has value. Now, it's easy in the midst of these discussions when thinking about financial privacy and Bitcoin and new fancy tools that use cryptography to get privacy, we actually forget that legacy financial systems already include privacy technology. It's called cash. We use it all the time. And it has limits, but it still is a privacy technology. So I think we should look to cash as a kind of model to find the right equilibrium compromise solution that will be acceptable to many for similar reasons to those that make cash acceptable. So we can put this as a conditional. Let's just think about this a little bit. If the balance of interests achieved by physical cash is acceptable, maybe even optimal, it might be optimal and an equilibrium in game theory terms, then a similar balance should be sought in a digital monetary network. Now, this means looking not for digital money, but for digital cash, or the difference between money versus cash. Digital money, that's the old stuff that's managed by banks. Digital cash would be a digital asset you can hold yourself and trade without a mediator. So here's where we start to make a modus ponens. We affirm the antecedent about that. Perhaps the balance of interests achieved by Bitcoin are in fact cash-like, and perhaps physical cash is indeed acceptable in that way. So it can achieve cash-like levels of privacy also with similar limits. We put those together and we can arrive at a conclusion like this. Bitcoin, similar to cash, on at least some of these dimensions, gives us reason to take Bitcoin seriously and assess it positively. It's a fancy word for this is pro tanto good. It's where we're looking at the pros and cons column for Bitcoin. This is a check in the pro column that it is like cash in these ways. And it's good to be like cash in those ways because cash is good to be those ways. Now, here's a negative consequence we might draw from cash parity. We should be wary of digital monies that don't reproduce cash's privacy features. Now, I think it's just better to stick with what we have. It works and balances various interests than something that abrogates financial privacy altogether. And what I'm thinking of here most notably is a central bank surveillance currency or central bank digital currency, where there's one ledger, one central bank that sees everything. That to me is way too far away from the ideal compromise of cash, or at least the acceptable compromise of cash. No privacy at all. Let's look at history. Then we'll look at the future. Now, some cypherpunks envisioned a kind of dramatic future, freedom technology that's going to really do some wild stuff. Bitcoin isn't really doing that, but it has done something important. It's given us a digital bearer asset that is cash-like. That is no small thing. And in this respect, the moderate supplement cypherpunks appear to have won for now. So these are the cypherpunks who don't try to completely replace legacy institutions, but just to supplement them with an opt-in alternative. And the core cypherpunk commitment to constructive separatism, I think, has been vindicated in important ways. We see now a model of activism that takes direct action, that builds an alternative, and that it achieves a difficult political aim without going through, for example, electoral politics, and without just complaining like protesters might do. It's actually doing something, and it's opt-in. Those who wish to use it may, those who don't wish need not. Okay, let's look to the future. Here's a big technical question. To what extent can Bitcoin's privacy tools stay ahead of growing corporate or state surveillance? Now, people are working all the time at improving CoinJoin and Lightning and those other tools I mentioned. But of course, adversaries on the other side, whether corporations who wish to use our information to send us better ads or more seductive ads, and states, repressive states even, who wish to control their citizens and surveil their every move. They're on the move as well. They're developing better surveillance tools. So it's an arms race. Unclear who's going to win. Now, this raises a normative question. Will future privacy techniques maintain this present pleasing compromise that I've described, or is it going to break it in one direction or another? I've suggested that breaking it in one direction or another would not be terrific. So there's a normative element to that futurology question. Let's zoom out, then we're done. Privacy, of course, is just one dimension along which we can evaluate Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. There are things like monetary policy, Bitcoin's use in crime, its scaling limits. What about the fact that a bunch of people just use it apparently as a speculative plaything? It's sort of like online gambling. I haven't said anything about those in this talk. Each deserves its own careful treatment. Zooming out yet further, we might ask this: can Bitcoin actually be resistance money, a tool to resist corporate or state overreach? Who? How? And then putting all those dimensions together, monetary policy and privacy and censorship resistance and financial inclusion and its environmental consequences and its use of energy and many other things besides. Well, is it overall good? What are its costs and benefits? Now, my feeling is that somebody really should write a book about this. It needs to be comprehensive, interdisciplinary, and should be measured, not just a piece of advocacy from a cult member, a big time Bitcoin fan, or from a Bitcoin deranged person who just hates it. We need an actual evaluation. Now, I'm afraid that has been done, and it took a lot of work, but it's coming soon. Here's the thesis of our new book coming out. Bitcoin is resistance money. It does empower its users to resist authoritarians, inflation, surveillance, censorship, and financial exclusion. But the trade-offs are real. There are some pretty serious negative consequences that come along, both for users and for others. Now, despite those imperfections, we argue that Bitcoin is a net benefit to the world. We're back to money again. I claimed that money is like water, that it's sometimes hard to see. I hope that through thinking about these issues with me and listening to me ramble for the last 49 minutes, you can see the water a little better, see it shimmer, and then see, there's some ethics to be done here. And if I've convinced you at least of that much, then I'll be pretty happy. But I'm sure you have questions, comments, objections. So let's hear them. Thank you all.
Great, thank you, Andrew. And yes, if you want to raise your hand or write something in the chat if you have a question for Andrew, really appreciate it. I will say the main message I got from that was that libertarians mostly complain. I don't know if that's the accurate
Was that mean?
No, I loved it. It was great. So any questions for Andrew? Yes, Eric.
Hey, Andrew. Thanks for sharing. That was a really great presentation. One of the things that caught my eye when you were covering the privacy trade-offs was that I didn't see a mention of Chaumian and eCash on Bitcoin, things like Fedimint or Cashew. I'm not sure if you've heard of these protocols or if you've been keeping up with these developments, but they introduce an element of trust in the form of a mint, where you swap Lightning for an eCash token, and that token uses Chaumian blinded signatures to get as close to perfect privacy as possible. It has very similar privacies to Cash, but with the huge caveat of there's trust in the mint. So I guess my question is, have you looked into any of the Chaumian eCash protocols that are built on Bitcoin? And what do you think about the trade-offs that they introduce and the fact that they are custodial by nature in, I guess, relative to the privacy benefits?
I love eCash. I love Callie, who's developing Cashew. And I've used Fedimint myself when I'm at a Bitcoin event that has a pop-up Fedimint server. I'll take part in it. And what this allows, there's some fancy terms here. So just for everybody else, Eric is right. This is a really cool development in Bitcoin that involves a new kind of compromise. What you do is you give Bitcoin to a trusted custodian, and then they issue new tokens that can be traded with full privacy, basically the best privacy protections that we have using cryptography, discovered in the 80s, but it's still really good cryptography. So there's a compromise. You're allowing somebody else to hold your Bitcoin for you, sort of like depositing your cash to a bank, but then you get something in return. Now, whether this is a right compromise is going to depend on the use case and the size. So the more you're depositing, the bigger risk you're taking. So I'll tell you my own approach. I'm a Bitcoin user myself. I will use trusted custodians and something like Cashew, which is Chaumian eCash built atop Bitcoin. I'll use that for small amounts, but there's no way in hell I'm entrusting anything insignificant to someone else when I could just take it myself, which is kind of the whole point of Bitcoin. So for a spending wallet, which is for regular use, for donations online, and just to send some zaps on Nostr, it's a social media platform where you can just send Bitcoin to people when you like their posts. Instead of clicking like, you can just send some Bitcoins. I use eCash for that. Those are small amounts. But but personally, I think the bigger the amount, the less sanguine you should be about entrusting the mint with your Bitcoin. So I see that as the fundamental trade-off. And what I like about it is that it's opt-in, that users can decide for themselves the way to make that trade-off and how much they're going to weight the risk of a custodian versus the risk of having a non-private, non-fully private token. So that part of the model is very nice, that it's opt-in. Unlike, say, most digital money in the dollar system, where it's not really opt-in. You have to use it. If you get paid in dollars in the United States, chances are you need a bank account. So unless you're a off-the-grid guy who only gets paid in cash, this is not opt-in. So I like it that you get to choose the compromise that works for you. But Eric, this is all really cool stuff. And I don't know if you're one of these Bitcoin people I hang out with on Twitter, we'll talk more about it there.
Great. Other questions for Andrew? I guess everyone's out buying some Bitcoin right now or something.
Could I say something about that actually, Zen?
Yes, and then I think it looks like Brian has a question too, but go ahead, Andrew.
Don't invest in Bitcoin. Invest in yourself by learning about Bitcoin. I will not give you invest advice except to invest in yourself. I think this is a technology worth learning about. I'm not going to tell you to go buy it, nor will I tell you to take a short position and bet against it, but invest in yourself. Okay. I just had to say it.
No, great advice. I love it. Brian, yes. Perhaps not. Did you have a question, Brian? I thought I saw your hand.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself. Was I successful?
Yes.
Ah, good to hear. Actually, this may be beyond the bounds of what you wanted to talk about today, but a couple of the sister schools for Stout have their own anaerobic digesters or biogas plants. And I've always thought that this central part of Wisconsin is just such a spot for potential development of alternative energy sources like that. And I've heard things about biogas and methane, landfill methane capture. I think it's being done in Pierce County also, just a little to the west here. Do you know any sources for that? Do you know anybody that's looking at using Bitcoin miners on methane capture or biogas or things like that? I think they'd be huge in this area.
So Brian, I don't know about the energy grid in Wisconsin in particular, but you're raising a very important question it's kind of obscure and anti-intuitive to first introduce this connection between methane and Bitcoin. It's like, what? Why connect methane and methane capture with Bitcoin? There actually is a deep connection here. Bitcoin miners use energy to do their work. And the question is, what kind of energy will they use? If it's hydrocarbons they're burning, it's going to release carbon dioxide. That's bad. That's emissions. Maybe you've heard about that in the news, that Bitcoin mining has an emissions footprint. Now, here's something really cool that you can do. If you burn methane instead of, let's say, some other hydrocarbon, that's actually better than releasing the methane into the atmosphere. So if you have an industrial operation that releases methane, for example, pig shit, lots of methane comes off of that. So that's biomass. Or you have an oil field where you're extracting oil from the ground and refining it to get natural gas, or natural gas is the methane. That is vented. Now, it's very bad when it's just vented, released. When the pig shit is releasing methane in the atmosphere, or when it's venting from an oil well. Far better to burn it and turn it into carbon dioxide. Why? Because methane is an 80 times worse greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So they're both greenhouse gases. They're both bad to have up there, but it's far, far worse for it to be methane. So if you burn it and turn it into carbon dioxide, that's actually better. Weirdly, releasing one greenhouse gas is actually a net improvement relative to the base case. So who's going to do this? Who's going to put these little machines that need energy all the time and at all places, and that don't need to be there just when the lights are on in a heavily populated area? That's one big part of electricity use, is just turning lights on as the sun goes down. Bitcoin miners. They're these tiny portable electricity using devices that you can put on top of a pig farm or put on top of otherwise vented methane and turn it into not methane, but carbon dioxide and get actually slow down, but not turn negative, the rate of climate change because of greenhouse gases. So there are some other weird connections here between atmospheric science and Bitcoin that are anti-intuitive and surprising. But Brian, I'm so glad you brought up that one, because that's one of my favorites to think about. I'm sorry I couldn't comment to the Wisconsin connection though. I do know the most pigs are in Iowa. It's Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. So it's just south of y'all. It's this little strip that it kind of curves below Chicago and then comes back up. And that's where all the pigs in the United States are. So that's where we're going to have a methane capture on top of pig farms. It'll be down there. And I don't know how if it goes like curves up into Wisconsin. I don't remember in the map.
Great. Any
Dan,
other
you drive
questions?
across the state a lot. Do you know this? Do you pass pig farms?
I was not familiar with that, although I do live on a farm myself. So not a
Okay.
massive farm though. Not, if we had pigs, it would be like 10 pigs or something like that. But no, I've not noticed much. Any other questions for Andrew?
I think you had one. I want to hear what you had, Zan.
Mine are just, reveal my lack of knowledge about this. So a few questions I had were, well, number one, the miners their role was confusing to me to some extent. I'm just not clear on that. But then also when you were showing the lightning illustration, and you mentioned that, if you have A, B, C, D, I forget where it went to, E or something. You mentioned that the mediators here, B, C, D, they can't actually access the transaction, right? And I assume, though, that my question would be, I assume that there's somehow they can't even choose to not pass on the transaction. Are they forced in some way to pass on the transaction? If A wants to go to E, these mediators are incapable of stopping that process, I would assume, right?
No, they can turn down any transactions they like. But the cool thing here is that there are many possible routes. So if you don't like the route that's available, or if it's blocked to you in some way, you could build your own. You just have your own Lightning node that starts connecting to other nodes, or you connect to your friends and just use the route that they already have. So it's always possible to route around censorship. So instead of having an always on routing device, it's more like, well, each routing device can do what it wants, but if they don't do what we want, we route around them.
Okay.
And you can't do that with banks. So for example, if PayPal has blocked you, or if you're on the OFAC list as a North Korean hacker, PayPal will block you, Chase will block you, JP Morgan will block you, Wells Fargo, everybody will block you. They're required to. And you can't route around them in using US dollar, because that's the entire US dollar system will block you. So it's very different to have a permissionless network where anybody can enter and start building new tools, new routing, new routes, and new ways to move stuff around in the network.
Okay,
So
interesting.
as you might imagine, regulators, that when they really understand this, their eyes bulge. But that's what Bitcoin does. For good or for ill, this is what it does.
So there's the possibility, because it was the censorship question that I was interested in, but there's the possibility there, but the risk is much, much lower given the fact that you don't have these staple institutions like we do in the sort of status quo, which could easily censor because there's only a limited finite number of them. Whereas in Bitcoin's model, any user essentially and any link between users could be a path that you could take to avoid any potential censorship.
Yes. And it's not impossible to censor in Bitcoin. It's just very expensive. You'd have to somehow find every node and shut it down.
Right.
And when anybody can spin up a node with a new computer, this is hard to do. And the footprint, the data footprint is easier to hide than many others. It's not like streaming movies 4K. It's actually pretty light data footprint to hide with VPNs and encryption and so on. So it's quite expensive to stamp out, as China has discovered in recent years. They were able to tamp down Bitcoin mining because of its electricity signature on the grid, uses lots of electricity. They banned it. They have not been able to stop people in mainland China from using Bitcoin themselves, which is wild. That the People's Republic of China is trying to do something and can't do it, because usually they succeed when they try these things.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Any other questions or thoughts? I don't want to monopolize here. Let's look at the chat here. Yeah, some comments in chat here. Privacy Girl says, check out the work of Margot Pays on the topic of Bitcoin and energy. And Brian says, there are large dairy and poultry operations in this part of Wisconsin. Seems like a missing opportunity to not capture that methane. Great. Any other thoughts, questions for Andrew?
Margot Paez is great, by the way. I agree.
All right. Well, Andrew, I want to thank you so much for staying up late to present this. It was a great talk, great conversation. And if you haven't already, check out to those attending, check out Andrew's book, Resistance Money. It should be coming out soon. Looking forward to getting into that. So thanks so much, Andrew. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Zan. There are some silent people in the crowd. I just want to extend an open invitation. I know this stuff is weird. It's also interesting and it's worth it. So if you want to think about this more with me, shoot me an email. I'll talk with any philosophers and people who like applied ethics about this because I just think it's important and it's worth really getting clear on and just, thinking in a serious way, not as a cultist, not as a critic, but just trying to evaluate it. So if I can help you with that, please reach out. And I just love talking about this with anybody who wants to. So don't invest in Bitcoin, invest in yourself, learn about it. And I'm here to help if I can.
Great. Thanks so much, Andrew. And thank you everyone for coming.
Cheers, y'all. Thank you again, Zan.
Yep. Bye-bye.